Welcome to Incentives Matter, your guide to what's new in behavioral science and behavioral economics. Let's see what's really driving decisions. Imagine pouring significant effort and resources into making sure every single person in a city perfectly sorts their household waste. Every plastic bottle, every glass jar, every piece of cardboard meticulously placed in the right bin. Now, what if all that effort, while noble, was largely missing the bigger picture of where the vast majority of waste actually comes from?
That's precisely the challenge this new perspective brings to light. It argues that while behavioral science has made great strides in nudging individual actions around waste, this I-frame approach, as it's called, can distract from much larger opportunities for waste reduction that exist beyond our curbside bins.
So the discussion is about an illusion almost, the idea that if individuals just behave better, the problem is solved, when in reality, the problem is far more systemic.
Exactly. It's like focusing on teaching individual fish not to pee in the ocean when the real issue might be a supertanker leaking oil. The individual actions are good, but they're often dwarfed by institutional and industrial waste streams.
That's a provocative way to frame it, especially given how much attention and funding go into household recycling campaigns. It raises the question of what has been overlooked.
It's a fundamental question about where behavioral interventions can have the most leverage. The paper suggests that there has been, perhaps unintentionally, a narrow lens applied to a very broad problem.
To understand this I-frame concept a bit more, as it seems central to the critique, what exactly does it mean to view a problem through an I-frame?
The I-frame, or individual frame, refers to a cognitive bias where there is a tendency to attribute problems, especially complex societal ones like environmental degradation or waste generation, primarily to individual choices, behaviors, and responsibilities. It's a focus on what I can do or what you should do. Think about a public health campaign that emphasizes diet and exercise for heart disease prevention, which is important but might sidestep the role of food deserts or corporate lobbying against healthier food options. In the context of waste, it means campaigns that zero in on whether people recycle correctly, reduce their plastic bag use, or compost their food scraps.
So it's not that those individual actions are bad or unnecessary, but rather that by focusing almost exclusively on them, the forest might be missed for the trees, or in this case, the landfill for the recycling bin.
Precisely. The research acknowledges that individual nudges can be effective. If recycling bins are made more convenient or clear instructions are provided, people are more likely to recycle. These interventions demonstrate clear success metrics at the micro level, but the argument is that this success, while real, can inadvertently draw attention away from the far larger sources of waste that originate in commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors. It creates a sort of perceived equivalence between the impact of individual actions and the impact of systemic choices.
And that perceived equivalence could be deeply misleading because the sheer volume of waste from those institutional sources is just in a different league. Is there data that helps understand the scale difference between household and institutional waste?
The source material strongly implies that institutional waste is substantially larger, though it doesn't offer specific percentages in this particular write-up. However, numerous broader environmental reports consistently show that industrial, commercial, and construction sectors generate a significantly higher proportion of overall waste, which includes household waste. For example, some estimates suggest industrial waste can be many multiples of household waste, encompassing everything from manufacturing byproducts and packaging to demolition debris and agricultural waste. So, when discussing opportunities, orders of magnitude are being considered.
That really puts it into perspective. If a 10% increase in household recycling rates is celebrated, but household waste only accounts for, say, 20% of the total waste stream, then even a perfect household recycling system still leaves 80% of the problem untouched. It suggests optimizing a small part of the system while the bigger parts are still wildly inefficient.
And potentially getting worse. The challenge with the I-frame is that it can create a sense of accomplishment or even complacency. People see the recycling truck, feel good about their sorted bins, and perceive progress. But the problem isn't just about what ends up in trash cans. It's about what gets produced, consumed, and discarded at every stage of a product's life cycle, often far upstream from the consumer.
So, why does the I frame persist so strongly in thinking and in behavioral science research, especially if the impact is potentially so limited relative to the overall problem? Is it simply easier to study, or is there a deeper psychological pull?
There are several reasons why the iframe is so prevalent. First, one reason is visibility. Household waste is highly visible. People see their own trash, their neighbor's trash, the overflowing bins, the public litter. It's a tangible, everyday experience. Industrial waste, on the other hand, is often hidden behind factory walls or in specialized facilities, out of sight and out of mind for the average person.
That makes sense. It is dealt with directly, so it feels like the natural place to intervene.
Exactly. A second reason is psychological appeal. Focusing on individual actions gives people a sense of agency and personal responsibility. It empowers them to feel like they are contributing to a solution, which is a powerful motivator. This also translates into easier messaging for public campaigns. Do your part, recycle more, reduce your footprint. It resonates with a desire for individual impact.
And for researchers, is there a pragmatic reason? Is it just simpler to design a study around individual behavior?
Absolutely. That's the third major factor, the ease of intervention and measurement. Designing a randomized controlled trial to see if a new bin design increases household recycling is far simpler than, say, trying to measure the behavioral impact of incentivizing procurement officers in a multinational corporation to shift to zero-waste packaging, or influencing design engineers to eliminate single-use components from their products. Individual behaviors are often discrete, easily observable, and relatively isolated, making them ideal targets for traditional behavioral science experiments. Changing organizational structures or industrial processes involves navigating complex bureaucracies, supply chains, and economic incentives, which is a much harder nut to crack.
So it's not just a cognitive bias, it's also a methodological convenience that reinforces the focus on individuals. And this leads to the crux of the argument, the bigger opportunities that are being missed. Where exactly are these opportunities, and what kind of behavioral interventions would even apply there?
The opportunities are vast and span across almost every sector. Consider manufacturing and industrial processes. This includes waste from raw material extraction, production lines, quality control rejects, and the sheer volume of packaging used in business-to-business transactions, which consumers never even see. A behavioral intervention here might not be a nudge to a consumer, but a nudge to a product designer to choose reusable components, or to a procurement manager to select suppliers with closed-loop systems.
So it's about nudging the behavior of the people making decisions further up the supply chain, not just the end user.
Precisely. Then there's commercial and retail waste. Consider all the packaging that comes into grocery stores, restaurants, or online retailers. Food waste in these settings is enormous. Behavioral interventions could target inventory managers to optimize stock levels and reduce spoilage, or designers to create packaging that is truly reusable or compostable at scale, rather than just recyclable in theory. It also involves influencing the decision-making around bulk purchasing and reducing single-use items in commercial operations.
And what about something like construction waste? That's an absolutely massive contributor to landfills.
An excellent example. Construction and demolition waste is a huge category. Here, behavioral science could look at how to incentivize architects to design for deconstruction, or contractors to sort and reuse materials rather than sending everything to a landfill. It could involve designing default options for material reuse in building permits, or creating feedback loops for construction companies on their waste output compared to industry benchmarks. The behavior being nudged is no longer the individual consumer, but professionals and organizations whose decisions have ripple effects across huge quantities of material.
It sounds like this requires a significant reframing, not just of the problem, but of who the target audience for behavioral intervention should be. The focus is moving from consumer choice to organizational design and policy.
That's the core shift. The paper implicitly advocates for a more expansive view of behavioral science. It it's not just about subtle cues at the point of choice for consumers. It's about understanding and influencing the decision-making environments for engineers, executives, policymakers, procurement specialists, and even entire organizations. It involves applying principles of organizational behavior, choice architecture and policy design, and understanding economic incentives at a systemic level.
This brings up an interesting point. Is behavioral science inherently better at solving individual problems, or has it just been applied more to individual problems because they're easier to isolate and measure?
That's a critical distinction. Behavioral science, in its broadest sense, is about understanding how humans make decisions. Those decision-making processes happen at all levels: individual consumers, but also managers in a corporation, politicians drafting legislation, or engineers designing products. The tools and frameworks of behavioral science, such as understanding heuristics, biases, social norms, and choice architecture, are absolutely applicable in these institutional contexts. There has been a disproportionate focus on the individual consumer because, as discussed, it's often more straightforward to design and measure an intervention there. But the potential for impact at the institutional level, if behavioral science can crack that code, is exponentially greater.
So, if this critique is accepted, what are the practical implications? What should researchers, policymakers, or even businesses start doing differently?
First, for researchers, it means consciously shifting focus and resources towards studying institutional waste. That means more research into procurement behaviors, product design decisions, supply chain optimization, and the behavioral economics of industrial processes. It requires developing new methodologies or adapting existing ones to study and intervene in complex organizational settings.
And for policymakers, how does this change their approach?
For policymakers, it means moving beyond simply mandating recycling or providing educational campaigns for citizens. It implies a greater emphasis on policies like extended producer responsibility, where manufacturers are held accountable for the entire life cycle of their products, including disposal. It also means designing regulatory frameworks that incentivize circular economy principles, reducing, reusing, and recycling materials at an industrial scale, rather than just at the consumer end. This could involve tax breaks for businesses that minimize waste or regulations that promote modular design for easier repair and recycling.
So, the nudge isn't for an individual to bring their reusable coffee cup, but for the coffee cup manufacturer to make a truly durable, endlessly reusable cup, or for the coffee shop to have a robust return and wash system for their cups.
Exactly. Or even for the city to invest in advanced recycling and reprocessing infrastructure that can handle a wider range of materials, making recycling less reliant on perfect individual sorting. The paper points to the need for a holistic, systems-level approach, where behavioral insights inform policy, design, and organizational strategy, rather than solely targeting the individual consumer. It's about designing systems where the default, the easy choice, is the low-waste option, and where the decisions of those with the most leverage are guided towards sustainability.
This truly puts a different spin on the conversation around waste and sustainability. It's not just about what is put in bins, but about the entire infrastructure that creates those bins and the stuff placed in them.
It's a call to broaden the perspective and apply behavioral science tools where they can have the most profound and far-reaching impact. If there is a serious commitment to addressing environmental challenges like waste, there is a need to look beyond the individual frame and tackle the institutional behaviors that dictate the vast majority of material flows.
So, to synthesize this, the first key insight is that the focus on individual waste behavior, while well-intentioned, significantly underestimates the scale of institutional waste. It's the I-frame illusion.
That's right. The second insight is that this disproportionate focus often stems from the visibility and ease of intervention at the individual level, making it a convenient but not necessarily the most impactful target for behavioral science.
And the third insight is that the biggest opportunities for waste reduction lie in applying behavioral science to institutional decision makers, designers, engineers, procurement managers, and policymakers to influence systemic changes further up the supply chain.
Absolutely. This calls for a reevaluation of where efforts and research are directed.
This leaves a compelling question. If behavioral science were to truly embrace this broader, systemic approach to waste, what would be the very first new area or type of decision maker one might think it should focus on?
And perhaps, how is this shift in responsibility effectively communicated without disempowering individuals from taking their own important, albeit smaller actions? It's about finding the right balance.
That's all for this episode of Incentives Matter. Join us next time as we keep unpacking what really drives decisions. Thanks for listening. Choose wisely, or at least know why you didn't.